how are the rights of migrant workers, particularly domestic workers, covered by the law? How do you ensure that legal services are available to all women, particularly migrant women, domestic workers, and women with disabilities?
How has the toll-free protection line helped in reducing violence against women? Can migrant women facing violence easily access the shelter services? In its reply to the list of issues, the State Party had mentioned that it would provide updated statistics on the monitoring of cases of violence against women in this next dialogue. And in keeping with this commitment, can the State Party provide statistical data on gender-based violence against women, including domestic violence and violence faced by migrant women, on the number of investigations, prosecutions, and convictions, and the sentences imposed on perpetrators and reparation provided to victims? This is a heavy question, but if you are not able to answer in time, maybe you could give it in writing as well. Please share significant actions taken by the Social Action Strategy in eradicating gender stereotypes against women, including migrant women and the stereotypes they face, and addressing cultural misconceptions. Has there been any impact assessment of the strategy? Has the State Party taken any steps to launch information campaigns with the media to strengthen understanding of substantive gender equality and continue to eliminate discriminatory stereotypes? Thank you.
So I will be addressing Article 6 on trafficking in women and girls and exploitation of prostitution. And I am coming back again to domestic work sector. And it seems that there is some legal and policy gaps which facilitate cases of trafficking and forced labor in Oman. A survey conducted on Sierra Leonean domestic worker women in Oman found that 84% of the 469 workers interviewed do not have their passports with them. Withholding the passports has been banned under the so-called Circular Number 2 of 2006. However, the committee could not receive more details on the application of this circular into practice, so maybe you could bring us some clarifications. COVID-19 pandemic worsened the situation of female domestic workers. Women reported increased working hours and other restrictions. Survey show that 99% of domestic workers do not have a day off per week, and 80% of them work between 16 and 20 hours a day, which, if true, and here is that is why we have this constructive dialogue for clarifications, it might be defined as a form of slavery. Migrant domestic workers also experience restrictions of movement. According to the research, again, 91% of domestic workers are not allowed to leave their employer's home. At the same time, the so-called release money is one of the most common tools that keeps a domestic worker bonded to her work and place. This has become a common and accepted practice, which is it seems not regulated or addressed legally. Could you please comment on this? In the introductory statement by the Honorable Head of the Delegation, it was mentioned that a new labor law, and it was mentioned also by other members of the delegation and our expert, was adopted on July 25th, 2023. It was assured that the law guarantees workers' rights, prohibiting any form of forced labor and providing the complaints and grievance mechanism for workers, including turning to the courts in cases of unfair dismissals. In this regard, I wonder if there is a clear and accessible complaint mechanism established for all cases of discrimination in the labor world, including domestic work. How many complaints, if it works, this mechanism, it was received from migrant domestic workers? Otherwise speaking, whether the new law covers migrant domestic workers. The establishment of a specialized department within the Office of the Public Prosecutor focused on trafficking cases signifies Oman's determination to prosecute offenders in human trafficking cases. Also, in 2019, the National Committee to Combat Human Trafficking established a rapid intervention task force for bringing perpetrators to justice. However, between the period 2021 and 2022, it seems Oman made no efforts to investigate or prosecute any traffickers of migrant workers for forced labor. What explanation can be provided for this situation? How does the state party ensures the effective enforcement of the Combating Trafficking in Persons Act, which was adopted in 2008? It is commendable that there is established a specialized government shelter for victims of human trafficking, which provides housing and health services for victims and food. However, it seems that the shelter is accessible under certain conditions. That is, it is open only for trafficking victims who would stay here longer and who would agree to take part in court proceedings as witnesses. Does the government consider lifting this condition and accept all trafficking victims and survivors in need? Finally, I wonder about the situation of sex trafficking in Oman, which is connected with the demand for sex market as it is in many other countries. Prostitution is illegal and criminalized in Oman, and penalties are harsh, but they only affect migrant women, it seems, and never the client. Why the client is not responsible for buying sex in Oman if prostitution in the state party is illegal? Thank you.
The principle of equal rights for women and men is enshrined in the Sultanate of Oman and allows for equality of all citizens, but excludes migrants and non-citizens from equality before the law. This contravenes Oman's obligation under Article 2 of the CEDAW Convention, which condemns discrimination against women in all forms. How was the new basic law of the state, introduced by Decree 6/2021, addressing the constitutional definition of discrimination and its applicability to both citizens and non-citizens? Now, you've already explained some developments in relation to labor law, but what is the situation more generally? And could the state party confirm whether labor, as we have been advised, whether labor recruitment offices in Oman promote different salaries based on nationality and discriminate against African nationalities in general and certain African nationalities in particular? Thank you.
Substantive equality and direct and indirect discrimination enshrined in the law. For example, in cases of indirect discrimination, how will the law deal with the new generation of stereotypes and subtle and insidious biases based on appearance, height, weight, color, and social status? Oman is yet to enshrine a sexual harassment policy in the law. Would you consider establishing a new workplace accountability mechanism for sexual harassment? And finally, how will you harmonize the new labor law with some of the existing gaps in the law on the protection of women domestic workers? We note that the new labor law explicitly prohibits the employer from keeping the worker's passport without the written consent of the worker. However, vestiges of the kafala sponsorship system still remains. Many countries in the GCC region, including the UAE, has abolished the sponsorship system, although some remnants may remain. Your Excellencies, the repatriation and deportation processes of those in irregular migration is still not clear to me, and I know that my colleagues have also established this in earlier conversations. Access to justice is key in irregular migration. Would you provide legal resources and legal aid? As the chair of the delegation mentioned, the basic clause, Article 18, on the dignity of all is the grounding principle of the Oman Constitution. And in this spirit, Your Excellencies, I ask you, would you consider the ratification of Domestic Workers Convention, ILO number 189? Currently, Oman leads the GCC in economic development, but has ratified the fewest number of ILO conventions in the region. Thank you.
different sources claim that there is a constant threat to mental health among domestic workers who practically work 24/7. Please provide data of domestic workers' health conditions. Thank you very much, Chair, and I apologize that I had so many questions about health, but that is a very important subject. And I sincerely thank you, representative of Health Ministry, that you answered almost all my questions, except few. And I remind one was about how Oman addresses challenges related to mental health, and particularly in the context of harmful practices affecting women, and what specialized clinics and services are available. And if you don't have data about domestic workers' health conditions, you could easily make that within next 24 hours and give us in written form. Thank you.
And coincides with another question on what are the access to justice mechanisms for women domestic workers who have faced sexual violence and other forms of abuse. As you know, this is the epicenter of the power differences, and power and control is at the center of sexual violence. And then finally, I think I may need some clarification on something that is still ambiguous to me. That is, how will you harmonize the new labor code with its stronger anti-discrimination provisions with the regulations on domestic workers? My reading of the current labor code is that protections for domestic workers continues to be missing in this new labor code. So thank you. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
Your Excellencies, we also acknowledge the laws and initiatives that you did strongly articulate in regards to aspects in relation to migrant women and issues of migrant domestic workers that you responded to very articulately in Article 6. However, Your Excellencies, because migrant women are also fall under disadvantaged groups of women that are addressed in Article 14, we'd like to inquire, because alternative reports do indicate that migrant women workers continue to face protection challenges to their rights, including exploitation and abuse and unequal access to medical care and health insurance. Your Excellencies, we look to you to please confirm if this is true, and if it is, what efforts is the state party taking to strongly enforce the laws to effectively protect the rights of women migrants, including the migrant domestic workers, including their right to be free from different forms of abuse and exploitation?
How does the state party collaborate with non-governmental organizations and institutions in implementing the National Women's Strategy? What measures has been taken to protect women human rights defenders from harassment, violence, and intimidation? Could you give us add the answers to the how do you defend the human rights defender? Thank you very much. Could you give us briefly your answers? Thank you. For the benefit of all women and girls in the country. The committee also reminds the state party that it selects a number of recommendations for immediate follow-up. These are mentioned at the end of the concluding observations. It invites the state party to pay particular attention to those selected recommendations and to submit information on their implementation within the deadline defined in the same paragraph. Thank you, Excellency, and we look forward to receiving your next periodic report. The committee will now convene closing meeting. The meeting is adjourned.